So you are officially the Salmonberry Trail Development Director. So what does that mean, and what does that job entail?
Well, so I work with a team of folks that are from the Tillamook Forest Heritage Trust and from state parks and the Department of Forestry that are developing the Salmonberry Trail. And as a development director, my job is to spread the word, share the vision, and ultimately to establish partnerships of funding and support that will help us to build the trail. I've been along on this project from the beginning. I retired as the director of the Department of Forestry, and at that point, it was 2011 when 2012 when when Tillamook County and the Port of Tillamook Bay came to state parks and the Department of Forestry. Tim Wood was head of state parks then. And they asked us, they had just experienced a catastrophic storm that washed out a whole bunch of the rail, the Port of Tillamook Bay rail line that went through there. And they were looking for, they knew that they weren't going to rebuild it, and they were looking for ideas to help them figure out what to do with it. And so we started a conversation. My board, the commission, the Parks Commission, those two, we had Senator Betsy Johnson, others got involved, Cycle Oregon got involved in those discussions, the Grand Ronde Tribe, and from those discussions emerged this vision of an 84-mile-long rail trail that runs between Banks and Tillamook, the town of Banks west of Portland, and Tillamook, across the top of the Coast Range that connects urban and rural in the footprint of this heavily damaged, in the middle part, rail line. Parts of it were not damaged by the storm.
Sure.
But the middle part was pretty significantly hit. So my job is to help raise the funds to make it happen.
And just out of curiosity, did you go in initially with the idea of a Rails to Trails? Was that in your mind, or did that really kind of come up in conversation? It was
definitely in our minds. You know, probably in the 1980s, 1990s, the topic of rail trail is relative to the Salmonberry and the Port of Tillamook Bay rail line and the Southern Pacific line prior to it being Port of Tillamook Bay has come up. There was a major storm in 1996 that closed, damaged the rail line. It was rebuilt then. You know, it's in an awful place to try to maintain a rail line.
Yeah.
You know, the top of the Coast Range gets 160 inches of rain a year, and high winds, and it's just throughout the life of the line. It was built between 1905 and 1911. The kind of energy that it has taken to keep that line open, it's pretty amazing. It's a topic that's come up at key junctures in the past, but I think the magnitude of the damage in 2007, I think just it was calling for another solution.
So how did you, I guess you kind of talked about how you came to be involved. What is the Salmonberry Trail? You kind of mentioned that and where it is. Can you go into a little more detail about exactly where it is?
Sure. You bet. If you've driven out Highway 26 out to, for instance, the Banks-Vernonia Trail, which is a cousin of the Salmonberry, it's like right next to it. If you're driving out along Highway 26 and you see the rail line off to your right, you know, in that area around Buxton, Manning, west of Banks there. That is actually the Port of Tillamook Bay rail line.
Okay.
And then you cross it again. It crosses you, actually, a little bit further down the way on Highway 26. So it basically goes out parallel with 26, and then it cuts south of Highway 26 and goes over the top of the Coast Range through a place called Cochrane, and then down through Belding down to Wheeler, and then it turns south just beyond Wheeler and goes down through Rockaway, Bay City, down to Tillamook, down to the Tillamook Airport, right? And it was actually the first way that Portland connected with the coast. It was there before any roads, and it was the way in the teens and 20s, the way people got to the beach for fun and for business, and it allowed for you know, shipments of cheese and dairy products and timber and people back and forth through that corridor. It was really, it probably was one of the more important rail connections over the Coast Range during its time.
So you mentioned how remote it is, and let's talk about, you're touching on the history. Why did they build it right there? Because it seems like in fact, it sounds like an awful location.
Well, I think the key was a couple thoughts. It was really built, the kind of key motivator was timber. And there's a town called Timber.
Yes.
It's not actually a town, but it's an unincorporated area, and a community of people who who love that place and who know that place, have lived there. But the real lure for building the railroad was to really open up the woods for early logging, and there was logging camps all along the rail line. In several different places, and mills in several different places. There was a mill up at the top of the Coast Range at Cochrane. So the idea was it made for the processing of wood, of timber, it made it much simpler. In other words, logs could be harvested, they could be dropped down low to the rail line, they could be then taken to a nearby mill and then pulled out. So that was really the primary focus for the placement
Sure.
of the line there. The Highway 6 was opened in 1941. The Sunset Highway, which was called the Wolf Creek Highway, was opened up in 1939 about. So that area between the Sunset and Highway 6, the Salmonberry rail line kind of goes right through that part of the Coast Range.
Yeah. And then coincidentally, people started using it to get to the coast, and and then interesting.
Right, in fact, the train was actually called the Daddy Train for a while, because during the 20s, what would happen would families would go over to the beach, they would go over to Bay Ocean, or they'd go to Rockaway or to Bay City, and they would be over there for the summer. And then on the weekends, on the Friday evenings, the dads would get on the train and they would ride over to the beach to be with their families, and they would come back. And actually, people referred to it at the time as the Daddy Train. So it moved a lot of people as well as a lot of products and things.
Yeah, and what an element of lifestyle in that era then.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah, as well as the communities along the line. You have Tillamook and Bay City and Wheeler, Rockaway, Timber and Banks, and you also have logging camps that were operating up in the uplands, adjacent to the rail lines. We know as well that long before that it was also parts of the way were a travel corridor for Native Americans passing between the Willamette Valley and the Oregon coast. So one of the neat things about the trail, the Salmonberry Trail, is that it provides an opportunity to interpret so many different layers of Oregon history and put people in touch with the cultural history as well as the natural history of the outdoors.
So let's break this down into, and you do, and your website does, 4 different segments. We've got the coast, Nehalem River, and the Salmonberry River, and the valley.
Right.
So why don't you delve into each of those and tell us a little bit about them?
Well, let's take a ride. How about that? If we do that,
perfect.
Right? So if we start in Banks, and we hope to be starting in Banks sometime in the next 3 to 5 years. If we start in Banks and ride west, that first stretch, we call it the valley stretch, and it's pretty flat. You've got ag fields, you've got forests in the uplands, and you actually go through a pretty significant tunnel, a number of trestles, and you're rising at a relatively light grade toward the top of the Coast Range, out to just beyond Timber. And so actually the valley segment goes all the way up to Cochrane, which is the top of the Coast Range where Washington County becomes Tillamook County. So imagine farm fields and timber, open timber, and a fairly simple gradient. That's the valley segment. You get up into the Salmonberry, the next segment, which we think of as kind of the wild river segment. It's much more remote. There are no roads that go into the Salmonberry Canyon. There is no cell phone coverage up there as well. We'll probably come back to that one. It's a place where the weather is the most challenging, the highest amount of rainfall, and the winds and the storms are the worst. And so in that stretch of the trail, while the first stretch, the valley stretch, is we're imagining it as a paved piece of trail. The next piece, that Salmonberry piece, the more remote setting, is probably not. It's probably not going to be paved. And there are going to be places, because of the damage that's happened in the canyon, where the trail's probably going to have to come out of the canyon because it's just not feasible to build it back. Places where the whole rail bed has just been completely scoured and washed out. So it's just not practical to put a trail back in there. So we'll probably have to come out for that. And then you drop down to the Nehalem, and the Nehalem is, you have some pasture lands, and kind of working dairy lands. You're still in the timber, but you're in a lighter, kind of a simpler gradient. It's not as remote. And then from that stretch, you kind of come around the corner there, around Wheeler or so, and head south just west of there. And that's the coast stretch. And the challenge, one of the challenges with the coastal stretch, is that it's very tight. You've got Highway 101, you've got Tillamook Bay, Nehalem Bay, and the Tillamook Bay, and you've got a rail line in there. And so some of the development questions that we have about that stretch are, where do you put, or can you put a trail, do a rail and trail?
Yes.
And so in that stretch, that's going to be it's going to be very costly to put a rail and trail there. There's a great enterprise happening right there now, the Oregon Coast Scenic Railway. They do scenic rail trains out of Rockaway that go up the line to the north a little bit now, and that's been really great for those communities. How we can really draft on each other and build on each other's strengths in that stretch and keep the construction costs down. That's going to be a question. So those are kind of the different personality types. The idea of the trail is some people may want to ride the whole thing, or you may want to walk a piece of it. And I suspect the people in the local communities on the west end, as well as in the Banks area, it may just be a thing to get out and walk a few miles for the day, and then there will be people who will be more adventurous, who will want to ride a chunk of it and maybe camp out overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to offer that's the thing about it. It offers so many different types of access and different types of experiences.
So, and might there be equestrians, or is that going to be okay?
Yeah. So so
Like
think
Banks
non-motorized. So
yeah.
like Banks Vernonia, right? And so if you've ridden Banks Vernonia, you've got a pretty good picture of what the Salmonberry will look like in that stretch, in the valley stretch on the eastern side, as well as in the Nehalem stretch on the western side. Yep.
So you say probably not paved because it's not feasible, kind of in the middle part. How do you envision the surface to be? What are you hoping for?
I would think of it. It's got to be wide enough to be able to accommodate equestrians and bikes and peds. So. I'm trying to think of a trail that people might relate to. It's probably a wider tread than you might see up on the Wildwood Trail in Forest Park, but probably not so wide that it creates issues in terms of maintenance. Yeah. So, but I would say not pavement. It could be cinders. I think those are details that we have yet to figure out.
Yes, you haven't quite gotten to.
Right?
Yeah. So how far is it then from Banks to the end of what you're...
It's 84 miles.
Okay, so that's 84 miles.
Right.
So maybe for a strong person, that would be a day's ride. Perhaps, like you're saying, you want to go maybe halfway and stop. Do you then anticipate some kind of pullouts to be able to pitch a tent? Because I'm thinking trees and... not a soft place
halfway
to put
is you're in trees and about halfway. Yeah, I think some of those questions kind of touch on the planning work that we're doing and that has been done and that needs to be done yet. There are at that point you are in the Tillamook State Forest, and in fact pretty much all the way over the Coast Range it's all Tillamook State Forest on either side. Almost all. There's a couple of small private inholdings in there. And there are some developed camp sites, campgrounds in the Tillamook now. There's Rears Camp, which is a horse camp on the eastern side. There's the Nehalem Falls Campground on the western side. And I think the kind of question is, what will development of the trail mean for those existing facilities? And is there a need to be thinking about some other facilities with the idea of a kind of natural stopping point, waypoint? Like you've mentioned, and I think those are items that are on the drawing board right now. We've done we've done a plan. Each segment, we've done a plan for the coastal segment. We're just now completing the plan for the valley segment, and we're working with local advisory committees and local landowners along the trail to help us think about those questions, including how we can tie into existing recreation opportunities. Like one of the first pieces that we hope that we'll be able to build will be a connecting trail that will loop into the Banks Vernonia Trail and take you, you'll be able to go out the Salmonberry line and then loop back up, go over a trestle, loop back up to the BV Trail, and then go up into Stubbs Stewart State Park. So those types of catalyst projects that we hope that we can get done early will begin to show people, introduce them to this idea, and show what the vision of access throughout the whole trail could be.
Right. And I like that because Stubbs Stewart seems to be so popular now. It really seems to have gained a great reputation for biking in there and staying. And so you're right, if you could add a whole entire different loop, that sounds like something that would have a lot of appeal to a lot of people.
Yes, I believe so.
It does start to get very exciting. So you've been having meetings, and so what's been the biggest challenge so far?
I think the biggest challenge, well, I might mention a couple. I think just having the capacity to do the work, to do the homework. I think this is a project that is known for doing its homework and the planning. It's basically, State Parks has an incredibly capable person named Dennis Wiley, who is the project manager for the Salmonberry Trail. The trust, there's a couple of folks, and we're retired, semi-retired folks that have worked around this stuff for many years and know it very well, but we're not the professional staff per se.
Right.
We know the geography and a lot of the relationships around that, but I think just having the capacity to really get up and go with this idea, to do sufficient homework. I mean, when you hear about the idea, it sounds really great, but then you got to start looking into the details about, who's gonna take care of it. What about the operations and maintenance? What happens if something goes wrong in a remote setting of the trail? What about fire safety and public safety? What about the neighbors that the trail goes past? How's this make them feel? So there's many questions that we really have to work on, and doing that work in the face of people saying, I want to go ride this right now, or I want to go walk it. That's the other part. It feels like there's so much enthusiasm. We have to kind of pace ourselves through that enthusiasm so that we don't get ahead of ourselves and that we can ask the hard questions and do the hard work before we just get to the fun stuff. That's probably been the biggest challenge.
Well, I've got to thank you for doing this. I mean, your passion is contagious, and it sounds like there's others on your team that are equally as passionate.
Yep.
So you've got to have that driving force, the human being that keeps making it go. It's
really a special place, both from a human history and a natural history standpoint. I got to know the Salmonberry. I was an interpreter on the train when the train went through. Some of the first kind of tour trains that went through there, and talking about sharing with people just the story of that place. It all burned, and the Tillamook burned a few times, and it was about one of the most remote places you could get from Portland. When the rail line was built, and seeing people get excited about those stories and just appreciating being out in a Coast Range forest environment along the rivers. I think that's one of the real exciting parts for me, is being able to help people make those connections with the outdoors and with the communities there as well. Yes. We're getting a little low on time. I think we talked about before the show that I think a lot of people are getting a little concerned about road riding, a little bit about safety, and are looking for exactly this kind of thing, to get off the highways and not share anything with a car. Right. A horse is okay, and just feel safer. So it just seems to be a trend in the way people are feeling about cycling right now. I agree. So what's coming up? Again, we're getting a little low on time, but what's coming up for you that you're trying to get going right now? Well, we're in the process, so as development director, my job is to raise funds to do the homework and then to build the trail. We're in the process of trying to add some capacity to our team, some folks who can help us tell the story and do the planning and help us raise some funds. So that's kind of a organizational milestone. in the spring and in the summer, we're going to be offering some opportunities to host people, to take people out to see it, and to do some events that can begin to share the vision and the excitement and allow people to see what we have in mind. So, I think if folks are interested in coming out to take a look, drop me a note. Certainly encourage people to look at the website. We've got some great short videos there that will show you what it looks like. A lot of photographs, historic as well as current photographs, and then information about all the planning work that's been done is at salmonberrytrail.org. And we've got a bunch of different social media channels so you can kind of track and see what's happening with us.
Yes, and you do have a great website.
Good.
And so just in conclusion, we can certainly go to your website. How might we be able to help?
Well, I think knowing about it and talking about it and getting excited about it, I think that's the first part. There will come a time where we're going to be asking for volunteers to help us do some preparation and trail work. There's going to be fundraising opportunities for people to join in on. But I think, right now it's really just sharing the excitement and the knowledge about what this can be and telling other folks. And, it's like building a snowman. You start with a little snowball and roll it, and so help us kind of build the momentum for the trail.
And I think we saw that happen with the BV Trail, the Banks for Nonia Trail. Nobody knew about it. Now everybody knows about it. Well, thank you so much,
You're very welcome.
for coming to tell us about this, and we will be spreading the word.
Very good.
It's very exciting.
Thanks for having me.